Hello and welcome to the Essential Adventure Sport podcast, where our aim is to shed some light on the world of adventure sports, be that top tips and best practice for coaches, leaders or guides, inspiring expeditions, or just a chat with one of the many interesting people who work and play in the outdoors. We really welcome interactions and discussions, so if you have an idea of a subject you'd like covering, or you'd like to contribute to the show itself, then please drop us a message. It's time to sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to episode 8 of the Essential Adventure Sport podcast. This week we're joined by Chris Easterbrook. Chris is a highly qualified coach across multiple paddle sport disciplines, and in addition to this, he's also working towards completing his professional doctorate in elite performance. So good evening, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. It's an honour to be here with you guys.
Great. Well, I probably didn't do you justice in that little introduction there. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your kind of coaching experiences to date, Chris?
No, I think the succinctness made it sound like I was more to offer than I may have, but I'll let the listeners decide that perhaps. But no, I live in North Wales. I really love paddling. Like I just really like being on the water, and I really enjoy coaching. So I left university and I ran my own business and taught whitewater kayaking primarily around Europe, and then I moved into teaching undergraduates on one of the outdoor leadership degrees, and now I work as a secondary school teacher teaching outdoor learning, which I absolutely love. I think it's fantastic.
That sounds amazing. Have you noticed much difference between those kind of educational settings that you've been working in?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would consider myself now an educator rather than a coach, and so I would have started off teaching whitewater kayaking as a coach, and I took a lot of pride in considering myself a coach and not an instructor then, and now I take a lot of pride in considering myself an educator over a coach. Not necessarily that one's better than the other, but just my focus these days is on educative themes rather than on aspects of performance. That seems to come secondary to me, working with both the undergraduates and with the students. It doesn't really matter how well they paddle or climb. It's what we gain from it beyond that is of value to them, rather than when we were teaching kayaking before that, there was lots of other things going on, and it's like the other side of the same coin, but essentially people want to be better. They want to have more fun and go on adventures and have a bit more skillfully.
So did you notice that most of your, going back to when you classed yourself as a coach, did you notice that most of that was, like you say, performance related? How do you differentiate between those, performance and the other?
Well, I guess I think of it as two sides of the same coin. When people present for coaching, and I still do a fair bit of it, they have their own learning outcomes. They've come with a goal in mind. I'd like to be able to do this. I want to be better at that. And what I found was that to address that, it was rarely refining their bow rudder or their inside edge turns or whatever. It was really something else, more educative themes that required attention, like their ability to make sense of novel situations, or just people having the confidence to go out and do it on their own. And of course, as an educator, it's just flipping that over. We want to build people's self-esteem or their ability to learn that is then transferable, and we use aspects of teaching performance to get that.
That makes sense. I mean, it's an ever-growing area, isn't it? People still want to be coached, and there's a big body of people out there who want to be involved in that side of things. And I read an article that you published recently about why people seek out adventure sport coaching. I'd be keen to explore a little bit about your findings from that, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of, I guess the first thing I would want to share about that really is it stems from the desire to undertake that little bit of research and then find out what people want from their coaching courses, is to see if what I experienced when I was running courses and the people that presented and what they want to see, if that was true of more than just the people that I would teach. So it seems pretty reasonable to me that people would buy into the Chris Easterbrook way of coaching, or the Nick, or way of coaching, and they would want a certain type of thing. So what I wanted to see was whether those aspects of the broader development that goes alongside coaching were true of more people, or whether it was just something that I had like built a niche out of. So I basically found a bunch of clients, and I use the word clients in that article, and it's a really imprecise term. It really bothers me. But so if you do read the article, it uses the word clients, but just think of it as students. But I won't. The detail there is so boring and academic. It's just not worth getting into. But the people that we teach learners, I wanted to find out what they wanted from their coaching. What makes a week long, a week out of people's busy time? What makes it value for them? And I asked them. I just sat down and chatted to them for half an hour, 40 minutes, and asked them a bunch of questions, and then did some analyzing of that information. And I found that people generally wanted three things from their coaching experience. They wanted to be better than they were before, and I use better in a really imprecise way, because better is in the eye of the beholder. Better may mean completely different things to different people, but they wanted to be better. They also wanted their coaching to be authentic, and what I mean by that is that and rock climbing is a really good example. But if I want to learn how to climb outdoors, part of the coaching experience is to go outside, and that would be true of perhaps a whitewater kayaker going to the Cardiff Whitewater Centre. As a coach, that potentially the best way of helping that person progress and get better is to go to a easily managed environment where you can take time out, have a coffee, come back, run some really structured, organized technical input sessions, and that would make them better in their eyes. But that wouldn't be an authentic experience if they wanted to if their goal was to go and paddle the dart with their club in a more skillful manner. So they wanted to be better. They wanted the coaching to feel authentic to them. And I guess authentic is another really interesting term, because authenticity is in the eye of the holder as well. And then the third aspect of coaching, which I've labeled as holistic, which kind of incorporates all the other things. And there are aspects of commodification and commercialization in that. So things like, being taken to the right ice cream shop. Actually, here's a good example. So if I get off at Church Bay, so on Anglesey, if we go out to Scaries, with the clients, there's one aspect they might enjoy is coming back for hot scones in Church Bay, because that is the sea kayaker thing to do. That is part of the culture. So this holistic aspect of the coaching is almost, in part, is like an induction into the culture of the sport. So like grabbing a coffee at Eric's Cafe, down at Traumatic, or Pete's Eats, I'm struggling with the climbing ones because I'm not really much of a climber, but you can kind of catch my drift. There's these all the other things about our sport, about adventure, that's quite special, and a small part of the coaching experience is including those bits. People are taking maybe 5 days out of their lives to go on a coaching course, and some part of it, it's okay for part of it to feel like a holiday. So they want to get better. That coaching needs to feel authentic, and it should be, enjoyable, have pleasurable aspects to it, rather than just being drilled in the rain or something.
Another word that jumped out at me from that particular article was the individualization of what's going on. How important is that part in coaching, that we individualize to our clients, students, learners?
I think it's hugely important for adventure sport coaches, and I think it's actually more what we mean by individualization in adventure sports kind of extends beyond what is traditionally meant by individualization from perhaps other sports or teaching and differentiation perhaps in teaching. And what I mean by that is, if you're playing football, a quality coach will individualize when appropriate their teaching, perhaps in terms of like micro goal setting or the pace or type of feedback they receive, or the way information is presented, normal kind of things. But for adventure sports coaches, we've got a whole level of individualization that comes even before we start actually teaching people. So with the football analogy just a minute ago, when everyone goes for football coaching, like everybody knows the rules of football. Like they are held internationally. So if you're looking for top level football coaching, everybody knows the rules. Everyone's already like on the first step. What's really critical with adventure sports is that what is adventurous for me might be different for someone else. And similarly, what is adventurous for me on one day in one context might be completely different another day. So as coaches, we have learners that present with their own individualized rule book on what makes their adventure like an adventure, like what makes adventure for them. And as a coach, we have to understand what that is before we even start teaching them. So I can give you an example perhaps, but if someone's taking an alpine guide, let's say, if your time is precious, you want to hire a guide to take you up a mountain, that can still be, a guide is still an adventure sports coach, because it's having to teach them certain aspects of the skill to perform and follow and climb and tie and belay and all sorts of, skills they do need to get right. But if I want to seek coaching in that environment to then do it myself, or to retain that information for a little bit longer, the way that guide and coach is going to teach that will be different. So, the first one, tie in, a knot looks like this, repeat it 5 times after me, now you can do it. That skill retention might be a day, but that might be more than enough. But if I'm going to be taught to do something for a month, a year, or 10 years down the line, it probably won't look like a block of the same practice. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but it probably will look more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think sometimes you've got to, like you say, in that guiding situation, especially something like that where they can pick up some very isolated skills that are really important, but it's all about replication, and the environment is almost a little bit irrelevant because they can tie that knot no matter where they're at. Then it doesn't matter about that long-term retention like you were just talking about then. The chances are, if they're doing it quite a bit and they get those multiple exposures to it, then it will lead to some more long-term retention for them. Nick, just to bring you in here, those 3 themes that Chris talked about a moment ago. So when people look to do a day or commonly a week with you, do you notice that they come for those 3 themes? So they're trying to improve and get better. They're looking for that authentic experience and to be part of a community. Is that something that you recognize with your clients, students?
Yeah, I would concur. And it's an interesting semantic discussion to decide what words we're going to use to describe the people that we go paddling with. I share your misgivings, Chris. I'm hesitant to describe the people I paddle with as clients, although I often use that word, because many of them I get to know quite well. And I noticed I was using the phrase client friend the other day. And I thought, that sounds awful. It sounds like a terribly professional transaction that I've just engaged in. I'm now selling friendship. But the reality is that I can't do my job as a coach unless I've got an open and honest and high quality relationship with the people that I spend on the water. It's kind of hard to achieve when you first meet people, but as you well know, Matt, we in one area of our working life, we get to know our clients quite well, and the boundaries get a bit blurred, and they become friends of ours. But anyway, that's not really the question you asked me, so I'll have a go at answering it. Yeah, many of the people I get to meet, they're already paddlers. They already identify as sea kayakers, and the authenticity of the experience is frequently rooted in their choice to come to North Wales. There are many great places you can go paddling in the UK, and Anglesey is one of them. And a lot of people come to this island because of the immediate access to dynamic water. And I think their view of the authenticity of their sport is rooted in the types of conditions we encounter. They definitely come to get better, although the way in which we would understand that can vary between people and from day to day. I can't remember, Chris, if you used a specific word to describe that, but my clients are certainly motivated by a sense of improvement and development, and the holistic aspect of it, the cultural elements of the sport. Goodness me. Well, as we all know, there's a wonderful accommodation base on the west coast of Anglesey called Anglesey Outdoors that is perhaps the primo accommodation site for sea kayakers who visit Anglesey. And there are some recognizable reasons why people go there. They can meet their fellow enthusiasts. They can discuss their day in the bar afterwards, and they can soak up the atmosphere of decades of paddlers that have come through the place. We do visit some familiar coffee shops, and it wasn't scones at Church Bay yesterday, Chris, but it was ice creams. So I think that qualifies.
It's potentially a bit hot for hot scones, but the scones there are out of this world.
There was only one show in town yesterday, and it wasn't the scones.
I was going to pick up on a couple of things that Nick, you mentioned, and I thought it was worth just adding slightly to it, if you don't mind. When you say you get to know your clients, the thing that I would add is that when you're, I would surmise that when you're chatting to them, what you without necessarily putting it in these labels, what you're trying to find out is what they're going to do after the coaching, as in how does the coaching fit into their participation, and that gives away aspects of what makes things adventurous for them, so they and this relates, I can see this in my whitewater coaching career a lot, but you would get people that would come to be better on an intermediate type environment, but would want some coaching in advanced environments to see what it looks like, to get some confidence in that kind of grade, but also to kind of go there. And if you know what they're planning on doing afterwards, you gain a handle on what their rule book for participation is. You get a handle on what makes an adventure fun for them. And there's this really sensible, great online community for whitewater paddlers in the UK called Slightly Whitewater. And the thing that makes me realistic about that group is they seem to have figured out what it is they like about kayaking, and then actually that takes all the pressure off aspects of performance. So if you know why you enjoy paddling, and or whatever the reason is, then your focus is on what you like, not on what you can't do or what you're trying to desperately become better at. So, if actually you want to be better, you want to have more confidence to participate in club trips because you recognize that with a bunch that have common interests is a pleasurable thing to do. It then all of a sudden doesn't matter if you swim once or twice in a day these days with a dry suit on. Like it just doesn't matter. But if their participation is framed like, oh my God, I have to nail every single rapid because because that's how I get judged, then there's already a misalignment between why they should be kayaking, or what they enjoy about kayaking, and then what we're trying to teach them. And so my suggestion, I would reckon, because this is what I reckon I do, but you know, when you're chatting to them, getting to know your clients, you're trying to figure out what makes things adventurous for them. And then that helps you figure out, well, what is it I'm actually going to do in this coaching session with them? You know, what are we going to try and figure out together? And that getting better. And I use better in a really imprecise way, because better could also just mean, it could mean more technical, it could mean more confident, it could mean more independence. It's totally for us to figure out. And of course, if I go back to my football analogy, when you want to get better at football, generally it's about winning. So not only are the rules commonly held between everybody, what you're aiming for is also pretty commonly, held. Like, I totally recognize that one might play five-a-side football in the evenings because it's a good laugh and you go for a beer afterwards. That totally makes sense. But there's still an aspect of competition and winning that I imagine that people would value, but we've still got to figure out what it is that makes people want to seek coaching based on their reasons for participation.
Yes. I've been distracted by your analogy, Chris, and I'm casting my mind back to the days when Matt and I not only played in, but perhaps ran a five-a-side football team. And we didn't always win, but I'd like to think we played the beautiful game pretty well. Now that I've said that, I do recall that we beat Nant Peris Outdoor Education Centre pretty comprehensively. So I guess it was about the performance in a way. And it was a different world to the outdoor adventure sports that we were enjoying. I was reflecting on my week thus far while you were asking that question. And I find myself thinking, this week in particular, we've encountered a new experience. A couple of my clients had arrived with the expressed intention of having a great week on Anglesey, a place they didn't know very well, perhaps visiting some of the more wonderful corners of the island. And really, the goals are to simply have a wonderful break. They're active paddlers and they're pretty good. And yesterday we headed out as a team towards the Skerries, which we safely arrived at. And en route, I spoke to one of my group members about the experience, and she turned to me and she said, "I've never done this before." I said, "What, like you've never been to the Skerries?" And she said, No, I've never turned away from the shore and paddled towards the distant horizon. I've always followed the coastline. And this is the first time I've ever done this. Oh, that's interesting. Well, we're about halfway now, so I think we'd better carry on. And we made it. We had a great time. We played in the small tide race at the end of the island, and there was some lovely surfs, and there was a swim, which didn't matter to anybody because we had the chance to do a one household rescue. And at the end of the day, when we reflected on our experiences, the theme that my particular client expressed was what a remarkably revealing adventure it had been to head for the open ocean and to cross to a distant island, something that she and her partner hadn't imagined they would do in their sea kayaking experience. And we stumbled across, I suppose, the opening of the sport for them, or rather the creating a greater sense of what sea kayaking could involve. Because they're from the southwest of England, we inevitably started talking about Lundy Island, and I've got a feeling they're going to send me a photo from that place one of these days. So a happy chance, moment of serendipity. We created a new type of authenticity.
I think both yourself and Chris, you've mentioned that same word that seems to crop up an awful lot in these conversations we've been having about having a conversation with the people that are taking part, and regularly checking in and finding out if their goal or their aim at the start of the day or the week is one thing, allowing that aim or goal to evolve over the course of the day or the week is something that we're able to do. I think we run quite a few events. In fact, we've run one just this weekend where we get people who come in and they sign up to do a workshop or a session, and it's got a name to it, whatever that may be. And I've had some experiences this weekend where they've signed up to do one thing. We've had the conversation and we go, right, that's what we're doing. But then over the course of the day, it turns out that they enjoy one particular aspect over the other. So I did a journey. In fact, we shared a group on Sunday, and you took your 4 and did something, and I took my 4 and did something, and we had this plan of having this skills journey, and it actually turned out that we didn't really do many skills as such. It became more about them just exploring an area that they'd never been to before. At varying points in the journey towards the stacks, someone would say, "Oh, this is the furthest I've been. This is the furthest I've been." And for all of them, there became a point where it was a new place. They'd never been there before, and they were getting a brand new experience. So I think it's great when they have that when we can allow those moments to happen rather than restricting and saying, actually, we're doing skills, so we're staying here or we're staying here. Giving them that freedom if conditions allow to just like your guys have done this week, have a new experience which might then inspire them to do something else in the future. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff. Chris, across the course of maybe the last 3 or 4 podcasts that we've done, there's been a reoccurring word that's come up, and it's that of independence. And we've talked about it very briefly across those previous podcasts, but the idea that we as coaches, or people out there as coaches, are aiming to become redundant. And I know we had a chat about that phrase, whether we like it or not. But the idea of making the students that we work with independent, and I'd be keen to find out, because I know this is an area that you're putting quite a bit of focus into. So I'd be keen to find out some information about whether the students themselves have this motivation to become independent, or whether it's the goal of the coach to make their students independent. So there's two areas there. So pick something and give us an answer.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some literature around that. It's been around for a while that suggests that coaches will, want to make themselves, redundant, and that seems to make sense to me. Part of the article that you referenced before, part of the developmental experience, which we've been referring to as being better, is about becoming more independent. And so I guess it's a good time to point out the title of my thesis is Developing the Independent Adventurer. So the question that you're asking is the one that I've asked myself for the last kind of 15 years. Is what I'm teaching really what people want, or am I just trying to project what my idea of adventure is onto them? So this it neatly ties into what we were talking about before. But the first thing in my mind is, do we actually have a shared view of adventure? As in, am I comfortable in what makes an adventure for me as the coach clear, so that if someone presents with a different idea of adventure, am I happy to say, oh, that sounds great, let's make that happen, rather than saying, no, you're doing it wrong, do it like I do it. And this is what kayaking should look like. It's all about X, whatever X is, so there's got to be this shared kind of platform. And yeah, the question is tricky, isn't it? Like, do people want it? But so I devised the article that you've referenced to try and determine if clients if learners, people that sought coaching, actually wanted that thing. And what's great about the article is that it did find that people that seek coaching do want independence. I've made a meal of saying that, but essentially it is put. So what is great is it's put into context. It's saying that people do want to be independent, but within being made a bit better, while it being authentic and having the holistic experience that they've sought. So it is not the be all and end all, and I think it probably has more. It's probably more important to coaches than it might be to learners. It's quite a well-known philosophy of high-level coaches to generate independence. And there's a little bit of difference in the literature between what's actually meant by that. So I've also done a bit of work to work out what we mean by independence. Well, what we mean by independent adventure. So if someone is seeking an independent adventure, what do we actually mean by that? And there's kind of two parts to this. The first is what makes something adventurous, and that is essentially a personalized construct of three things: some aspect of challenge, some social interaction, and some sort of connection with the natural world. And how you mix those three things up is up to the individual on any given day, and that's fine. And the other thing that makes it independent is in many ways the degree of decision making the participant has over their participation. So if I'm the coach and I give them no scope to make decisions, they probably don't feel very independent. Whereas if I'm leading from behind, let's say, and giving them lots of scope to feel things out, they probably feel a bit more independent. And part of that independence is their decision making, so the degree in which they're making decisions. There's an independence in their ability to learn. So if they can start to make things, so we're talking about primarily teaching adults as well. That's probably worth clarifying as well. But part of that independence is being able to learn from novel experiences. It's obviously quite disempowering if you cross an eddy line and have absolutely no idea. Let's say you capsize and having absolutely no idea what happened. That's a pretty like dependent situation to be in. You have to go back to your coach and go, whoa, I just went upside down. What happened? So there's aspects of being able to learn for yourself, being able to decide things for yourself, and having the confidence to actually go and do something. So an independent adventure is on one hand, the reasons you might participate in adventure. So the right combination of people, nature, or natural environments, and the right level of challenge, and the right level of decision making, ability to learn, and confidence to go do something. And what makes life really confusing as a coach is that, it'll be obvious now I've said it out loud, but the level of what makes something independent is individual as well. So as coaches, we're now stuck in this really complicated world where what makes something adventurous and authentic is individual. What people might want to learn, goals wise, is obviously individual. And then what makes independence is individual. So we have so much to chat about when we meet our learners before we can really start being effective coaches. You could teach them something. I'll catch up with you. We'll find the details of your participation later, but I'm going to teach you this really cool thing that I know how to do, which is, a cross-deck barrel rudder hand change, and yeah, sure, they'll learn something, but to be effective coaching, it has to fit with all of those other things that are really complicated. Why is it so hard? It's just, there's lots going on, isn't there?
There's loads going on, and on that same theme, I've got loads of questions here. So I need to backtrack a little bit to the very start when you started passionately talking about your subject area. So it's great. I'm loving it. So one of the things you said was at the start, being aligned with what you as the coach think is adventure and what the participant thinks is adventure. And then I can't remember the exact word you used, but it was to do with you allowing them to have their experience, even if it doesn't match what you think that is. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Is that
Yeah, I mean, so I can give you an example for myself, right? So I really enjoy whitewater kayaking, I really enjoy canoeing, and I really enjoy sea kayaking. But I one of the things I enjoy about canoeing is I like being more in touch with the natural environment. So if I go canoeing, like what makes a canoeing trip is, you know, seeing a kingfisher or some other type of animal, you know, and then I have a different reason why. One of the reasons I enjoy sea kayaking is different, and one of the reasons I enjoy whitewater is kayaking is different. But when we go canoeing, that doesn't mean that everybody that comes to learn canoeing with me wants to see kingfishers. They might be really interested in, and I'm really interested in this. This is not derogatory, but like getting the Kelly kettle out, you know, making a tarp, like and I do that all the time with the kids. So I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but, you know, like that for some people, particularly in canoe is just a vehicle to get somewhere. And it might be to find some really idyllic bit of granite sticking out of the water where you can make a little fire in a camp and really just kind of chill. So if someone presents for coaching and they want to be better at canoeing, and I chat to them and I figure out, oh, okay, what is it about canoeing you enjoy, and what are you, what are you thinking of doing next? Then I'm kind of nailing, drilling down into some goals. Then I will go and grab a Kelly kettle and a tarp out of my car to make sure I can participate in what they consider adventurous, because then the coaching that I want to give to them aligns with their idea of adventure. And it's not to say that I wouldn't point out a kingfisher when it came, because it would be great, but it doesn't mean it's the most important thing for them. And it means that if I'm paddling around and my knife J isn't perfect, well, I don't mind, because I'm looking for a kingfishers, guys. Like, that's what I'm here to do.
So I've got an experience very recently, maybe in the last 10 days or so. I did a day's one-to-one coaching, sup coaching, and we did a journey on the River Dee, from Farndon to Chester. That sort of really nice, nothing much going on, and we agreed that the day would involve us doing the journey, and along the way we were looking at some leadership stuff, all sorts of different things. And it was interesting that the perception of the person I was working with of what my idea of adventure was also different. And there was a couple of times that she said, "Oh, you must be really bored. That this is the environment is not an exciting environment for you." And yet I had to reply to her honestly, going, "No, I'm having a great time," because it's actually something a little bit out of the ordinary for me, because I don't do that sort of stuff every single day. So the idea of being in that environment, and I got 4 kingfishers that day. She got none, so I was the winner on that one. But there was times when we stopped and we kind of just sat on our boards and we were floating near the edge, and there was damselflies knocking around the board and stuff. And actually, I had a really good day, even though it's a work day. I had a really good day. What was interesting was that there was a perception from her that I might find the environment boring, just based on the conditions, but actually all those other things that came to play, and the novelty of it, and all those different things actually meant that I was having a great time. So I think sometimes it's not always the way of the coach liking it rough and bumpy all the time compared to the student, is it? It just depends on, like you say, discipline to discipline, or environment to environment, country to country, possibly as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of good literature, good stories, loads of blogs, loads of academic articles that just reminding people that the reason we go on adventures is challenges. There are appropriate challenges part of it, but there's so much more to it, like the connection with our friends, or being immersed in natural settings. And actually the level of challenge can drop right off, and you can still have an adventure sport type day on flat water, while the challenge then becomes looking for the kingfishers, or whatever else you might be looking for, or catching up with friends that you haven't seen for a while, and you go for a paddle to talk. I live in Llangollen here. I'm right on the D. And more often than not, I'll catch up with somebody by going for a paddle. It's a shared activity. A real closeness. There's a bond. And there's loads of good stories and literature about. That is not just common to me. That's unique to me. That's like a common thing. So I think our learners definitely, build. We want to build this like alignment between what it is we're trying to do. What it is we enjoy, and that induction into the culture is more about. It's not really about as hard as you can. It's about the people that you're with, or about the nature. There's all this balance between what we're trying to achieve.
And I guess the way we manage, one of those elements that you talked about with the challenge area, I guess how we manage that challenge that they're looking for becomes quite an important task for us, doesn't it? And if I can bring you in here, Nick, do you have experiences, or have you had experiences of having to manage the challenge level at both ends? So somebody who comes in and you become aware that they may benefit from challenge, so you can up it. And I guess the tougher one to deal with is if people come in and what they want is beyond them at that moment, and then you having to kind of rein it back. Have you got any kind of experiences of those two things?
Sure, yeah, and it can be really satisfying to as a coach to be involved with both the examples you've just given. I get to paddle with a lot of clients who are seeking to extend their comfort zones, to move into conditions that they're not sure are within their ability, or indeed sometimes conditions that they've previously encountered and felt uncomfortable in. And, this wouldn't be a decent podcast series if we didn't introduce a bit of controversy. So I do occasionally find myself working with clients who've had negative experiences in the past, occasionally but rarely on previous courses, sometimes but not often when they've been out with friends or club paddlers, and occasionally if they've visited other events. And sometimes people find themselves put into situations where their sense of autonomy, their sense of control over outcome is eroded by the actions of a very direct leadership or coaching style, whereby they're not sure if they're ready to do it, but on that particular day, it becomes a negative experience for them because they feel their decision-making power wasn't afforded. And in those circumstances, I find it very helpful to focus on the choices and options that my clients have, and for them to manage the exposure to increased challenge. I do get a lot of clients who want to go into big conditions, and I sometimes find myself sitting on the edge of stuff that makes me feel uncomfortable. Not least because I use my imagination to project into the future and try to picture what kind of rescue I'm going to perform. That can happen because many sea kayakers, and that's the world I work in as a coach predominantly. Many sea kayakers develop pretty strong technical skills. These days the kit's good. There's loads of information available on YouTube, and you can become a pretty good paddler, which can take you into situations where awareness, environmental understanding, and decision making become really important, and the ability to balance in your boat and roll secondary. And in those circumstances, I'm finding that I'm having to find solutions that are rooted in risk management, understanding of technical demands versus consequence. So both those areas can be satisfying, but the key is to recognize what the motivations and the barriers to learning are within each of my students or clients.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit, but there's I can think of whitewater is a really obvious example where people often present on courses, and of course what they want to do is hook something huge, and there's definitely, I feel like, a dilemma in there, particularly working out in the Alps in some of the steeper environments. All the marketing photos are of said steeper environments, and while everyone's really friendly and like, yeah, whatever you think, Chris, I'll follow your lead, and what do you think, you're also kind of aware that they're keen to do it, and I find myself definitely and very consciously deciding and being quite upfront with them when I'm taking independence away from them and when I'm offering them independence. So what's interesting, and we've skipped ahead a few bits in some ways, but having done this research, I find myself coming back to my own practice. Like, now I know a bunch of stuff. Does it actually make me any better as a coach? I think one of the aspects that I've considered is being more open. Think, okay, well, I can give you enough instructions to make this waterfall, this drop possible, and I can be at the bottom to pick up the pieces, okay? And then I actually think I could also, whatever the outcome, facilitate some sort of like learning on it. And so the choice, it's a classic choice, but it's like, do you run it or not? Well, here's some basic instructions. It only needs to work once. Follow me, do exactly what I do, and it'll probably work out just fine. And I can tell them, and I can telegraph the line back to them in the way that I paddle and the moves that I make, and choose a line. And, of course, there's a little bit of dice rolling in there, but it can often work out, and if you can get things, if you can be open with it, well, I'm going to take all that away from you, all that independence away from you to give you an experience. Is that what you're after? And it might not be what they're after all the time, every day, but actually at moments there's real benefit in that. So if they've gone to Italy and paddled this great waterfall and they've got the money shot, not only have you given a bit of good value for money, and maybe they'll book with you again, they're actually quite likely to go back to Serpent's Tail on the D or Triple Step on the Dart, and well, I did that big thing with that coach, but this thing that I know, I've got this, and then they're better. They are fulfilling their participation in a way that people wanted to. So, I spent a long time thinking, okay, well, let's not do the hard stuff. Let's just build up to it, kind of like slowly, in a progressive step kind of way. And in some ways, I think that was based on my own span of control, like what I was comfortable letting happen, the scenario I was happily rescuing, how quickly I could recognize it going wrong and intervene. And now I feel, reasonably comfortable as a coach. There's quite a lot I'm willing to go with, knowing that I can make sense out of it and it be of value if I've chosen it for the right reasons, for the right level of independence that fits with their notion of adventure.
So do you think that as whether we call ourselves coaches or leaders or whatever it might be, do you think that as our personal experience level increases, our willingness to let people do things because we feel we're in a better position to, like you said, spot things or deal with them, does that expand a little bit? Or
yeah, I would have thought it in a much broader sense than just that one example. if you're if you're learning to coach, you may only have one way of teaching a certain thing. I mean, that's by definition is what a beginning, like a learner coach means. You only have a couple of ways of doing one outcome. Yes. So my only way of developing confidence is to whole part whole. We'll break it down, build it up, show the context, build it down into pieces. So there's like mastery of the little bits, put it together, and great. And that makes perfect sense. By almost definition, an experienced, good coach will have more than one way of dealing with all of those things. And it's not that you dismiss the first example, so you might go coaching and it might look exactly like a new coach, but you've chosen it for the right reasons. Similarly, you might choose to take them out onto something huge, and I can think some examples where I took people out on something huge and it was a terrible mistake. I made a terrible mistake, but there were times when I chose to do something quite sporty, and it felt like a bit of a roll of the dice, but I thought about it and that had the same outcome. But you wouldn't do that as a beginning coach, because you just wouldn't know that it would work, or you wouldn't be able to pick up the pieces afterwards, or, there's only one route to each thing.
We've had conversations in the past about, the coach education scheme and the kind of the pros and cons for it. Where do you think things like that sit for you?
Well, I mean, I progressed through the British Canoeing Awards. I did every step. I followed the process, and then I worked full time. It was my full time job to teach people kayaking, and I definitely felt like there was a gap between what the one or two ways I knew to do something, and then what I needed to work in practice, and I feel like one of my motivations to do my research, my doctorate work, is that adventure sports coaching really is so complicated that we should really check that the way we're doing it is the best way. And I think teaching for independence has the potential to be when you think about what could be the hardest part of the job, people that want to do something authentic and be taught for independence at the same time is a real challenge. You're starting to you're sacrificing things out of your week. So I want to come to North Wales, I want to come to Anglesey, I want to go on a classic sea trip. Great, that seems a pretty reasonable thing to expect. But if their goal is also to then be able to go to Lundy on their own, then you might actually have to sacrifice quite a lot of time to discuss tidal planning, which actually, probably isn't that authentic in terms of learning experiences. A classroom-based, writing down, getting some vectors in there. I'm sure you guys have got some really creative ways of doing it, but like on the whole, the ideas of like developing independence and having great experiences and induction into the cultures are quite opposite ends of the spectrum in some ways. They're really tricky, and I'm part of my motivation to trying to tackle this question. How do we develop independence? Is that it is quite hard, and if we can kind of get some handle on what it is that good coaches are doing, then that only helps and inform coach education. And I can't help but be influenced by teaching at the moment, and there's quite a lot of conversation in teaching about the difference between teacher training and teacher education. So how can you train someone to work in a job for their life, like for lifelong learning? So how are they going to be continually improving? How are they going to have people going to figure out how to make sense of online learning in a new, in the last 6 months, we've all had to figure this kind of stuff out, rather than a training program which tells you how to run a lesson, and then there's huge differences between there. And it's not that you need, one or the other, but you kind of need both. You need to know how to structure a session so you can actually teach people the nuts and bolts of how to go paddling. But you also, somewhere along the way, need to know how to make sense of novel environments, or how confidence works. So if you have a swim, it's not the end of the world, or what processes people use to make decisions. And I think at the moment we think about coach education as an educative task rather than as a training program.
Yeah, no, and it's sparked. And I don't know which way to ask these questions now, because I don't know if there is a right way to ask the next two questions that I've just thought of. But I guess I'll go with this one first. Do you think, both of you think, that participants, people who are involved in all these different adventure sports, can they go out and can they learn and develop their own independence away from a coaching environment? Is that something that can happen?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take off my coaching hat. I'm going to reflect on my experiences of gaining gaining progress towards some goals. Let's even call them dreams that I had, that were self-organized and in the absence of a professional coach. In my early adult life, I worked as a ski instructor, and my horizons were confined by the boundaries of the ski resorts in which I worked. I knew nothing about the mountain environment. So after a number of seasons, I was, from a technical point of view, I was a pretty good skier, but I didn't know what lay beyond the rope. And then life changed for me. I came to live in North Wales, and 10 years passed, and I finally returned to skiing when I felt I could afford it. And my motivations had shifted somewhat then, because I'd learned a little bit about the mountain environment of Snowdonia. I'd had my first rock climbing experiences, and I'd gone off to the French Alps in the summer to climb by some extremely easy routes, one or two of the major peaks. So when I got back into skiing, because I'd been introduced at an early stage to the heroes of extreme skiing, I had a very good idea of what had taken place in the latter decades of the 20th century, and I just had this dream that if I could just ski one of those routes, wouldn't that just be a wonderful experience in my life? And I didn't really know how to make progress with that goal. The one thing I knew I wasn't going to do was pay the hundreds of pounds per day required to commission a guide to take me down my dream route. That option wasn't available to me. So I just embarked on a regular goal setting process. I knew enough about coaching to know that I could, to some extent, be my own coach. And I did the old classic TTPP. Where are my technical skills? How much do I know about the environment? Do I have the fitness to do this? And how am I going to react when I'm in that environment? What are my psychological skills like? And I identified a bunch of weaknesses, and I figured out ways in which I could develop those skills while I was still in North Wales. I then decided that I would embark on this process, and I took myself off to Chamonix and scoured the guidebook for something I could start with, and it all went from there. I'm still here to tell the tale. I had a lot of adventures along the way, and I learned from my mistakes as well. Some outdoor environments are pretty harsh and don't permit the worst of errors. But I guess I either made some good decisions or I was quite lucky. And the only purpose of this anecdote is that I have a firm belief that then feeds into my professional coaching life, that anybody, anywhere can get to where they want to be without the necessity to engage in a coaching relationship. Having said that, you can speed up the process, you can achieve more, and you can arguably be safer while you do it if you, on occasions, engage the services of a good coach. I think that guides me in my coaching life, because I meet lots and lots of sea kayakers who want to move forwards in their progress, and I can't go with them. So I've got to help them to understand what they can do for themselves, which is often all of it, and what they might benefit from if they want to accelerate the process and have a decent margin for safety by getting some coaching into that mix.
Do you think then that, because that's a great example of you going away and generating your own experiences which would lead towards independence, do you think that was supported massively by your confidence in your technical skills and your ability to put yourself where you wanted to be and not fall over? If I was to go and take on the same goal, not that I necessarily would, but if I was, it would be a different story for me, because my technical skills are only a touch lower than yours. But it just makes me think whether that was a real supporting factor for you in being able to do that on your own.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's worth acknowledging that you and I have spent a week together in Chamonix, and your relative lack of technical skills didn't really stop me from exposing you to risk. But let's draw a veil over that and just acknowledge that I don't and never should operate as a professional mountain guide. Sorry, what was the question again?
No, just you everything you said really made sense, and I like that you're transferring that into your coaching. And I was minded to think that you were able to do that in part because of your previous skiing experience that you talked of when you were younger, and you brought in some technical skills which give you a solid base.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll just really kind of just quickly answer that one. It was a huge advantage to me, but it was a double-edged sword. I felt very secure with my skis on my feet in situations that mattered, but that sense of security took me into places where errors weren't going to be very easily forgiven. And I had a relative lack of tactical decision-making because I was unfamiliar to an extent with a complex glacial environment. And on one occasion, I had the chance to reflect on that while I was lying inside a crevasse. It wasn't my technical skills that had put me there. It was poor decision-making. So you've got to be careful with being a strong technical skier or a strong technical paddler. And I could find examples in sea kayaking of how that experience can occur to you, but I think Chris wants to jump in.
Well, I was gonna contrast that, because I was listening to you, Nick, and I was thinking, the thing that's allowed that is you obviously have a really good handle on how learning works, and this might be the difference between the coach listening and going, the technical skills have given you the ability to venture out, and the educator here thinking, oh well, actually, because you're a coach educator yourself, you have a really good handle on how learning works. So you have a structure to apply to that you can then build up to. And,
you're right. However, there are other factors at work that you're well aware of. So when I'm sea kayak coaching on Anglesey, let's just agree, I love being out there. You can't get a better office, and it's a wonderful working environment. As a coach, I'm relatively dispassionate about it. I love observing my students achieve gains in their paddling. But if conditions don't permit us to go to a particular place, I don't lose much sleep over it. I was very driven to develop my skiing experience in a specific mountain environment. And you can't enter that world without a degree of commitment. But there's a trap there, because it engages emotional elements of your brain that can get in the way of clear-sighted decision-making. And on a small handful of occasions, I found myself in difficulties, which upon reflection were a consequence of me chasing my dreams. Yeah. So it's a tough one for anyone who engages in independent learning, because if we go back to your whitewater coaching, you'll go to just the most wonderfully inspiring locations with your paddlers. Some of these river trips you can take in Europe and further afield are just the most spectacular things you can do. And it could be that your students are so highly motivated to have that experience that they'll disregard or accept a higher level of risk than might be appropriate in that moment. I think our judgment gets clouded when we're highly emotive about something. And there's a role for a coach there, I think.
Can I have a controversial moment? Is that allowed?
Why we're here.
Great. Well, okay. Okay. All right. If people are listening this long, then they're allowed a little way bit of controversy. I think in a broad way, okay, we have a huge preoccupation with safety in adventure sports. Adventure sports, when compared objectively to participation rates and the number of incidents, is not that risky. And I give you but what we are doing is comparing two different types of risk. So football and rugby are more risky than probably generally perceived now that concussion is better understood. Okay, so actually things that are long established are probably a bit more risky than everyone is willing to admit. Hence things like young people being banned heading the ball, for example. When it goes wrong in adventure sports, it tends to be pretty fairly catastrophic. The severity is much higher, let's say, broken limbs and shoulders and all sorts of things. The moment of incident is quite severe, but happens much less frequently. So I'm not suggesting that adventure sports is less risky. It's just a different type of risk than other things. But because we operate in a world that is perceived as quite risky, then I think we have a real preoccupation with safety. And that's why our understanding of things like traps and the sanctity of the experience and the halo effect are really, like mentioned on this podcast. It's not some niche bit of information. On advanced safety and rescue courses, I talk about heuristics and these kind of decision makings as a matter of course, because I think they're really good. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that we have a real preoccupation with safety. It is reasonably safe sport, and we can probably afford certain moments of what feels like unsafe behavior, but isn't necessarily risky, or failure that has real value. And I'm not suggesting that people get hurt. It is at times for learning, for independence, where people get real value out of failure. Like not making it to the skerries could be a really valuable learning experience if it doesn't crush their confidence or their idea of independence.
I completely agree, and it takes me back to something you were describing at the start of the podcast regarding independence and authenticity. If we own our own experiences and we're responsible for all our decisions, we might, in one sense, achieve less than we might with the presence of an experienced coach or guide. But the value of that achievement could be much higher to us. I've had countless examples of that in mountain environments because most of my adventures have been independent. I've, if I could use the word, achieved far less in rock climbing than I might have done if I'd got myself into a community of more experienced climbers. But I value every successful climb I've experienced because it's all my own.
So we spent a lot of the podcast talking about the context for independence. But there was one example, the rock climbing example, something that ties in really nicely from how coaches generate independence. And one of the things that and kind of have written down somewhere useful is that coaches will often let coaches like a belay. So a climber will get to the top of a climb, they'll make themselves a belay, and probably before they bring their seconder up, the coach will have a little bit of a look-see. And what the coach will see in the first instant is what they would have done. Like what is the absolute optimum level of safety here? Like what would I have done? And then the coach then and then they look at what the client, the learner has done. And if it's different, they've now got a real significant choice, a really important choice to make. Do they call up the learner and go, I wouldn't have done it like that. Give me those nuts and redo it for them. And if you do it in a professional way, you have now given them a mental, like a mental model of what a perfect belay looks like in that environment. So that's a really valuable learning. You've gone, this wasn't very safe, or it wasn't optimum. This is what optimum looks like. Similarly, they could cast their eye over it and go, it isn't what I would have done, but it is safe. And then they might add a level of safety somehow as a backup to the whole system, but in a subtle way that doesn't undermine the level of independence. So we've got this idea that a coach can allow a suboptimal performance if it achieves other goals.
So that could be a form of satisficing. We might not necessarily achieve the optimum set of decisions to achieve an outcome. And from a coaching perspective, we can weigh up whether the differences are significant enough to organize a change, or whether, to put it another way, that's good enough.
And I guess the expert coach can tell what's good enough and what's not, rather than the novice coach that has one way of doing it. Like, it has to look like this for it to be safe. And therefore, what we were talking about before, the broader range of meaning can be made from a much broader range of experiences.
Yeah. Interesting.
But of course, the coach has to decide which is the most important in that scenario. And that's how you figure that out is the real question, isn't it? That's the humdinger.
If I can, it's still part of this subject, but go back to your when you alerted us to a controversial moment, talking about the fact that maybe we have this preoccupation with safety in comparison to some other sports that have a higher level of risk attached to them. So you talked about rugby, for example. Is one of the reasons why we have this preoccupation because of the responsibility that either we have or that it's perceived that we have over the people that we work with? So, for example, when I used to coach rugby league, then I'd have people who'd get injured, but no one would ever look at me and go, well, that was your fault as the coach. It was just accepted as a part of the game that may happen. And there wasn't a focus on me as the coach to go, well, that's a responsibility. Whereas when we have people that we're looking after, we have a worry that if something does happen, well, then the book kind of stops with us. And also the fact that there are far less incidents. When one does happen, everyone goes, ooh, there it is. Whereas you can look in A&E on a Sunday afternoon at 5:00 and you'll see tons of people with broken ankles and fingers and dislocations and all sorts of stuff from sport. But no one ever goes, oh, well, that's, rugby's bad.
But in that mode that they, somebody has looked at all the cases of concussion and gone, there's something going on here. And so somebody has done something with that example. But I think the other interesting question, and I would be interested in the answer to the study, is our sport safer because we're preoccupied with safety, or is it safe-ish and we're preoccupied with safety? And the reason I say that is because I see quite often, well, not quite often, but at times, safety is a reason not to do something, rather than it's not a sensible learning outcome. Do you see what I mean? So you might easily, and the classic risk management is about, your classic identify the hazard, the risk, categorize the severity, the likelihood, and you come out with a control and a number. But actually what we do as a coach is we go in eventually what's because it's risky, and it's a risk of failure. It's a risk of challenge, might be too hard for us. So we can't be so strangled by safety that we forget why we go out. Like, it is a different thing.
And I think that point you make about concussion, out of all the examples from traditional sports, that's probably one where I, as the coach, if I'm in that environment, if I'm coaching rugby, for example, that's something where I do have a responsibility, because something will have happened and then I've got to make a choice, especially at amateur sport, whether I allow that person to play again or say, actually, you know what, not only are you not playing now, but you're not playing, if you look in professional sport, a concussion protocol could last weeks. Whereas in amateur sport, I know I've played rugby for many years, and there's times when I've walked down the street and been physically sick after a game because I've had a bang to the head, and then I'm back in training again next week, and I'm playing again, and I'm falling asleep at home, and all these things that actually we look now and we go, they're massive red flags. So I think something like that would be a good example of where we have a responsibility, and if we don't follow through on that, well, then there could be a consequence to that, maybe.
Yeah, and I would suggest that safety isn't the only thing, on that regard. Like the idea of we spend more time in wild environments. We probably, it is our office, so therefore the nature of it, the state of it is probably quite important to us. So we also have a duty to role model, like sound environmental behavior, and not only zero impact, but actually trying to have a positive impact. So with my young people, it's not enough now for us. It's not enough to leave no footprint. We have to, literally everywhere we go, there is some impact of humans. I don't take them to like super wild places. So the wildness that we go to, like Clynidwell or something, there's tons of rubbish there. So it's not enough just to, role model safety or role model, sound environmental behavior. We have to go above and beyond. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think because the consequences are so high and all the thing, or potentially so high, that, I think it does become a really important thing. And actually, from an independence point of view, in fact, this weekend when we were working with groups this weekend, I can't remember it happening before, but when I had the conversation at the start of the day, what is it everyone's looking for today? Someone actually said to me, I want to be more independent. I can't remember when that's happened to me before, but they stumped up at the start and they said those words, I want to be more independent, because when I go away on club trips, I feel like I'm always, what was the words that she used? I'm the one that needs looking after. So she felt a sense of when she's out in her club trips in her environments that she's always thinking, well, what if something happens? They're going to have to come and get me. So what she wanted was that feeling and that ability to go, right, I can operate there with those other people within the club, and I'm not. I think she might have used the word hindrance, which is totally not truth, but that was her reason for it. And it is the first time I think anyone's ever said, I want to be independent.
Yeah, I mean, I came to the word independence after quite a lot of thinking. So it took a long time for me to come to my research title. And what I basically came from practice was this idea that I'd essentially taught confidence for a long time. Like, I felt like the mainstay of my whitewater coaching career was, kind of intermediate whitewater, but teaching confidence. People had the nuts and bolts of how to paddle. They could edge the boat, they could make it go forwards. There was some, there's always some improvement to offer, but it was actually about people having the confidence to feel like they're not a hindrance, or to feel like they're independent. And that, the way my thesis ends, I come back to the idea of what confidence means, because confidence is also a really imprecise word. But it's also a way you can measure confidence. Like, there are standardized tools for that kind of thing. So there's a really interesting way of measuring. They're not the same, but you can kind of get an idea of how independent someone is by how confident they are. And obviously too much confidence is a problem. Not enough doesn't get you anywhere. And there's like an optimum kind of middle ground and a growth through through learning to a confidence where you can decide when to go and when not to go. You are confident if you make a mistake, you will learn from it, and that's okay. Rather than like making a mistake and feeling like the world's it's over. So yeah, I think confidence is kind of at the heart of what I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, without necessarily like drilling into confidence per se. I don't know if that makes sense actually, but it's more than just confidence, but it's everywhere really, isn't it?
Yeah, and that might be the start of many different things, because it only takes a small step, whatever that looks like, but it only takes a small step in that confidence level to start on the road towards becoming more independent, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely there's like a threshold, like there's a threshold level of confidence to go out on your own for the first time, maybe without the club leaders or without a coach. Because once you cross that threshold, and you have a broadly positive experience, you're kind of you're flying, aren't you? Really, you're kind of making sense of things. You're learning. You know where to get feedback from. You know how to interact with people. You understand the environment enough to make decisions and blah blah blah. All the complexity that we've talked about kind of starts to fall together, doesn't it? Fit together.
Yeah, and it's something I noticed that I tend to spend more time when I'm working with individuals or groups on those non-technical aspects. Most people in kind of moderate or advanced environments can actually get the boat from A to B, and they can make their moves in some way or another. But I've said this before. What I tend to notice is that it comes back to those tactical elements and that decision making and all those things that are often the things that catch people out, not because they couldn't do a sweep stroke or a bow rudder or whatever it might be. That becomes a little bit irrelevant, because if they'd have made an appropriate choice, then everything would have worked out fine, probably. I don't know, but I can probably hedge my bets and say that if they timed it and they didn't go when it all was going crazy and they waited till it settled down, they'd probably have a more successful outcome. Or they just follow on. Someone else goes through, so we go, all right, well, that's okay. I can go through that gap in the rocks because the person in front went through, but not paying any attention to other aspects like their performance level, their technical ability, their decision making. We're not all the same, are we? So no, that makes total sense, really. I'm loving all the stuff we're talking about, Chris, but I am also aware of the time as well, and it's fastly getting on. And there's another kind of big subject area that I don't think we're going to get a chance to talk about tonight. So maybe we need part 2 of this independence conversation, because I think everything we've talked about, why it's important, is great. And it'd be really good to maybe have a part 2 where we say, all right, then how are we going to go about doing that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was. I feel like it is an important conversation to work out what role it has, and particularly as it doesn't feature too heavily in coach education, and the commercialization and commodification of adventure is a pretty interesting topic to get into as well. And of course, independence kind of weaves its way in between all of that as a mid-ground. So I think it really is important to kind of have a good grasp on, well, at least it was for me. I mean, I felt like it wasn't enough. I felt like I probably could have, but it wasn't okay for me just to jump in with go, how do coaches generate independence? It felt like on my PhD journey, it was important to go for what is it? Why do people even want it, and why? And before jumping into that. So I think it's a valuable conversation, but potentially the more interesting part is how to do it. What kind of strategies, what kind of ideas coaches use that do generate independence. And I hinted at this before, but of course, if you know the kind of strategies that do work for independence, then when you're not teaching for independence, the ones that are quite time intensive, you don't need to bother with. You can go with much simpler techniques that will probably do the job just as easily. And I think you start building up the knowledge that allows for a real sophisticated coaching practice. You can choose the right thing at the right time for the right person in the right context.
Okay, let's agree then that this is officially part 1, and we'll put it on the title, so then it forces us to have a part 2. But let's come back and another point. Let's talk about how coaches can help foster independence within their students, but then also how participants can go away and do some work for themselves to help with that generation of independence. So there you go. It's official. We're doing a part.
That sounds great, but I mean, if I was you, I would have waited for the analytics on the podcast to come in first. See.
Well,
I'm not convinced anyone but me is interested in this, but
I'm sure we've got some farm somewhere that's ranking up numbers for us.
Yeah,
it's costing us millions, but
Brilliant.
It looks great. No, I'm sure people at home will find the sort of things we've talked about tonight super interesting.
And do people do people tend to comment on our controversial points?
As yet, we've had very few people comment. We've had conversations, with folk that you bump into, but there's been no direct comments. But feel free, you have the freedom, listeners, to comment and to get in touch and to let us know what your thoughts are on some of the stuff we've discussed tonight. So there you go. There's another open invitation. Oh, it's a night of first, isn't it? Chris, thanks a lot for your time tonight. And I believe you're off sea kayaking in the morning. You're off up to Scotland.
Yeah, gonna head up to Skye tomorrow and make the most of the last of the holidays before school starts again. So, yeah. Yeah,
the joys of being a teacher.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's hard. The fight is real. I mean, when teachers talk about it being hard, it really is. But it's also great. It's great in many ways.
I'm not gonna have a go. Great. Thanks a lot for your contributions tonight, Chris. Nick, as always, loving what you've got to contribute as well. And that's it. So we'll see you in a few weeks for part 2, Chris. If you've enjoyed the show, why not take a look at our Essential Members Programme? For only £3.60 a month, you get exclusive access to a huge range of videos, articles and webinars covering technical skills, leadership principles and coaching issues from the world of paddle sports, with many topics easily transferred to other adventure sports. We think it's amazing value, so come and check it out. Remember, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, have fun and stay safe.